If there are multiple departments within that fund, each department is listed separately. And then there are 3 different account categories within each appropriation. So there's wages and benefits, other, which is most of the traditional vendor payments, and then capital outlay are the larger capitalized expenses that we do traditionally for capital projects.
Very good. Questions or comments? Continue to take, we'll take time on this as well.
Yes.
I have a motion.
Motion for time.
Motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All righty, and just a reminder to everyone that tomorrow evening we'll be hearing from, we begin our budget hearings. Tomorrow night we'll hear from the mayor's office. We'll also hear from City Council and Public Safety. And let's see, Muni Court, Fire, and Police tomorrow night, I believe?
I don't believe, Muni Court, I believe, is on Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Municipal Court Judges, it says on that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, there's actually 2. So actually, originally, was it the judges that were supposed to go? Yeah, so both the clerk's office and the judges will be going on Wednesday.
Okay, so that,
yeah.
all right. Okay, very good. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, here, one other thing, we do have a brief overview of the operating budget that we traditionally present with when we introduce the appropriation ordinance.
I'd like to do that.
You have all been distributed, I believe, 2 documents. So the first of which is the...
We're going to deduct this from your time tomorrow night.
Okay. Noted. So the first document is the executive summary that we present. This, again, is in a traditional format that we present every year, which will include some of the highlights of what will be presented in the operating budget. And then also, to make things a little bit easier this year, you've been given a report that's been run off of our budget database that shows just one line for each of the budgets. So there are a total of 207 budgets being presented this year, and this has the summary of those budgets being presented by department. Also listed is the employee counts for the budgets that do have full-time employees charged to them, and it shows the difference between this year's budgeted employees and last year's.
Excellent.
Okay. So if you would all refer to the executive summary, briefly I'll cover some of the budget assumptions that we are making this year for 2019. So our income tax revenues, we are forecasting to increase by 2% in 2019. So just a little bit of a highlight on how our tax collections came in last year. As you all know, we passed issue 4, and that resulted in about a $17.8 million increase in our income taxes. That's not all from issue 4, so that was the combined increase in our taxes, both from issue 4 and from the growth that we had in our, just from inflation and higher tax revenues from our companies. So our total taxes went up about $17.8 million last year, and that represents about a 12.4% increase. So we were happy with our tax collections last year. We think we had a very good year. The next item, the local government fund, we're anticipating a slight growth in local government revenues. We did see some growth last year, but as you're aware that we don't receive the revenue that we used to years ago. So we're now getting about $6.5 million in local government revenue, where we used to receive over $14 million. So it's a much smaller percentage of our revenues than it used to be. We do anticipate some mild growth. Last year it grew by about $170,000, so it's not a huge part of our general fund budget, but we do expect a little bit of growth there.
A large piece of that loss was the estate tax?
Well, that doesn't even include the estate tax. So the estate tax on top of that was about a $4 to $5 million loss per year. Property taxes, we expect them to remain stable. We have seen our assessed valuation grow very slightly in the last couple of years. Last year we saw about 1.5% growth in our property tax. That represented about $400,000 of extra revenue. It's pretty minor growth, but it is nice to see our assessed valuation growing again after several years of it declining. Assumption number 4 for revenues is that we are not increasing water sewer service rates in 2019. So
Repeat that.
we are not increasing water or sewer service rates in 2019.
Just one more time.
Yeah. So that we expect those to remain stable for 2019. We have no intention of increasing rates. And then, as always, we will examine all of our current structure of fees, licenses, fines, to see if there are areas that, would be appropriate to change some of our fee structures, within our service revenues. For the expenditure assumptions, we are currently negotiating with our bargaining units. We are budgeting a 2% wage growth, but that is subject to, whatever is agreed to in our bargaining agreements. But this budget includes a 2% cost of living increase for all employees. Our healthcare costs are fairly stable for 2019. We did have a good year last year in terms of our medical claims. We had a lower year than what we had the year before. We are budgeting slightly more in 2019 than what we spent in 2018, but we've been able to kind of hold the increase in our healthcare costs down. And then the city does intend to hire police officers and firefighters to get those departments to their traditional strength that we've had over the past few years. So that means 455 police officers and 363 firefighters.
Which is reflected in the budget.
Which is where we've been for the past few years, yes. Okay, the next page, I'm not going to cover too much. This is the format that the expenditures are presented. These are the different types of accounts that we have on the expenditure side of our ledger. So we have our wages and benefits, and that's one category that's appropriated within the operating budget. And then the other category is, as I said, most of the vendor-based expenditures, as well as all of the inter-fund transfers. So there are transfers between the different funds of the city, and those are covered in this section. And then the outlay are the large dollar items exceeding $7,500 that we capitalize, and those are traditionally our capital budget expenses. Okay, page 3 is a highlight of our general fund. So our general fund budget is going to be $167,764,290. That's the number you see in the bottom right of the page, which is about a $61,000 decrease from the 2018 general fund budget. So we worked hard to basically keep the general fund flat for 2019. And we think we've presented a budget that allows us to fund the services that we have in the general fund and not need increased revenues. So our revenue budget for the general fund is about $167.9 million. This will keep our general fund balance, will actually grow somewhat to over $10 million if we're able to achieve the amounts that we've budgeted here for 2019. I'll briefly go through the the revenue categories. So we're showing about $118.2 million $118.2 million in taxes, assessments, and JED revenue. So this includes our 2% growth in the income tax, as well as, and we'll talk about the fire department in a minute, but we're using an additional $500,000 of issue 4 money for operating for the fire department. And that's due in large part because we have an existing SAFER grant that expires in March that funded 25 firefighters. So as we'll see, we have 8 less firefighters than we had last year. It does allow us to get to that 363 firefighters that we've traditionally had, but the loss of that SAFER grant for 2019 means we could not fund the 371 that we funded last year. So we're going back to 363 for fire.
The ones we lost were, go ahead. I'll get to those questions.
Yeah, so they are hiring a class because they're well below that now. The class will allow them to get to that 363. The other revenue categories, there really aren't huge changes. We have decreased our reliance on miscellaneous revenues within the general fund. You can see that in 2017, that was the year that we did the cell tower transaction, and that's why that large amount is there. We're only forecasting about $3.9 million in miscellaneous revenues for 2019. And then on the expense side, our labor budget, you can see the growth in our labor budget, and a lot of that is because we have a 2% increase, and then we also have those additional firefighters that were previously charged to that SAFER fund coming over to the general fund. The fringe category actually decreases a little bit. That's in part to the medical self-insurance chargeback costs, as well as last year we actually had a 13th month of pension payments that we do not have this year. So we do get some savings from that in 2019. And that's the highlights for the expense side. As I said, the budget is about $167.7 million, which is about a $61,000 decrease from the 2018 operating budget. Page 4 just shows, this is a graph that we present every year, and it shows the percentage of our general fund that's made up of taxes. So taxes is obviously taxes, and JED revenues are the predominant source of funding for our general fund. As the local government funds have been lowered in recent years, that's become a smaller and smaller percentage of our budget. So, as I said, we've lost about $8 million in funding from the local government fund and an additional 4 to 5 from the phase out of the inheritance tax. And then on the expense side, and this hasn't changed much over the years, you can see that the bulk of our operating costs in the general fund is from labor. Yeah, plus benefits. So 48 plus 24. Yeah. So those are the two largest categories, which is almost 2/3 of our, or almost 3/4, I should say, of our budget. Page 5, this is a listing of all of the forecasted revenues for each fund in the city. And you can see that those amounts add up to about $607.5 million. So that is our anticipated revenue for 2019. On page 6, are the expenses by fund. So you can see that our total budgeted expenses are about $611.3 million. So last year our budget exceeded $615 million, so the entire budget has dropped by about $4 million. And then finally, the last page shows our total employee counts going back to 2015. And you can see that we've stayed fairly constant, right around, just slightly above and below 1,800 employees. So we are actually below 1,800 right now. 1,811 is where we ended 2018. And then you can see that we've budgeted for exactly 1,900 employees. And typically at any given time, we have about 100 vacancies. So that is consistent with what we've had the last several years, where our budget that's presented is typically about 100 employees higher than what our count usually is at any given time. And that's just because throughout the city with an organization this large, typically there's about 100 vacancies at any given time. So that 1,900 represents a 13 employee decrease from what we budgeted in 2018.
I made just last night, this afternoon about, your time being cut from tomorrow night. This executive summary, will everybody get a copy? That's, I know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. We begin at what time tomorrow evening?
I believe it's 3 o'clock. Yeah.
3 o'clock. Okay. Okay, very good. And, as we've done over the past few years, we really, in order to keep us on task, myself included, really we'll try to stick to numbers questions. And I know it's easy for me to drift off into operational questions. We'll really try to stay with number questions. And are there any other comments or questions before we close? All right, we will call this meeting adjourned at 3:40 p.m. Thank you so much.